Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Pokémon Film Perspectives, and today we're going to be discussing the 10th animated film to be released as part of the Pokémon franchise, The Rise of Darkrai. And once again, bit of fair warning, using my phone as a light again, it's set to silent, but if it gets an alert you will hear that bzzz sound, so again, apologies in advance. But anyway, my history with The Rise of Darkrai. Now, the thing is, I actually saw this film when it first premiered on Cartoon Network. Like, it was following up from like a 3-part story arc that was going on in Diamond and Pearl, which I wanted to see both because I thought the 3-part story arc sounded cool, and I was interested in seeing where this Pokemon film would go, because I think at this point I had seen Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, and I was more interested in seeing what the Pokemon movies are up to. And on top of that, Diamond and Pearl was one of the few seasons of Pokemon that I had actively been keeping up with. So I was interested to see them make a movie from this season. After all, they made movies from the other seasons, so I thought, hey, maybe the movie for this one will be good too. So I wound up watching it, even recorded it on tape, and I remember when I was a kid that I did enjoy the movie. With that said, do I still think the film holds up even now? Well, let's take a look at it and find out. So, yeah, what's the plot for this movie? Well, in this case, because this film takes place during Diamond and Pearl, once again, Ash's group has changed up. Brock is still around, but May and Max have now flown the coop, and in their place is a new trainer by the name of Dawn, who, like May before her, was the female option if you played Diamond and Pearl and wanted to be the girl. So, yeah, basically, like with Ash, she wants to be a Pokemon master in her own right, except instead of challenging gyms, she ends up participating in contests and winning ribbons, and basically she just travels with Ash and Brock as they go on their own journey through the Sinnoh region. But actually, contests are kind of what the word of the day is, because Ash and Co. are making their way to a town called Alamos Town because they heard that there's a Pokemon contest going on there, and so Dawn wants to participate. As such, the trio of trainers end up making their way to Alamos Town. Only when they try to reach Alamos Town, they find that it's on top of I'm not going to call it a mountain, but a large rock formation in the middle of a lake. And they came at it from the wrong side, because there's a bridge that's supposed to lead into Alamos Town, but unfortunately they read the map wrong, and so they came from the opposite side, meaning that if they want to cross the bridge, they're going to have to make a long trek around, something that nobody is happy with. But thankfully help arrives in the form of a girl named Alice, who basically runs her own hot air balloon tour guide service, and so she sees Ash and Co. stranded by the lake, and she offers them a ride into the town, which the trio happily accept, with Brock, of course, foaming at the mouth to see Alice because she's a girl, and as we've established, Brock pretty much will go after any woman that has a pulse, though in this case, since Max isn't around to keep Brock in line, the one that does that is one of his Pokemon, specifically the Pokemon Krogunk, who will usually poison jab Brock in the side to get him to pass out and stop bugging women, which Krogunk does as Brock tries asking Alice on a date, and, well, you do. Although he quickly recovers from that, so hey, I guess he's building up a resistance. Either way, Alice leads the group into the town, but upon going into the town, they encounter something strange. From what I can describe it, it's like reality itself shakes. Like, there are waves there seem to be strange reality waves, as I'm going to call them, that pass through the town and cause a bit of turbulence. And we see that somewhere in the town, where there is a man that's located in a lab, and his machines are picking up this strange reality quake and are pinpointing the source of it. As such, once the quake ends, Alice asks Ash and Co. if they're fine, and they say they are. And to try and make up for this little bit of turbulence, she offers to just show them around Alamos. And from there, we once again get our opening credits intro as we get a remix of the Pokemon We Will Be Heroes theme, and it's a pretty nice theme. It's the first time I heard it, and I like it. I think this is the theme for Pokemon Battle Dimensions. I don't remember exactly, but basically it's that. And again, like I said, Ash and Co. see the town, see the sights. Ash and Co. even challenge a trio of trainers who have the fully evolved version of the Gen 4 starters, so that's nice. But the tour eventually ends with Alice leading the trio to this local fixture in Alamos known as that's basically just this big garden. It's just wide open, fresh, has clean water, a little forest for it, and basically the garden is just, like I said, it's open for everyone. Pokemon live here, people walk through here. It's just basically, if you want to sit down and relax, this garden is for you. As such, As such, once Alice arrives, she's immediately greeted by a group of Pokemon because she liked to play in this garden when she was a kid, so all the Pokemon know her. And so Ash and Co. decide to release all their Pokemon and let them play in the garden. And for a little bit, everything seems to be going fine as all the Pokemon are getting along, playing, goofing off, just having a genuinely nice time. But things kind of go wrong immediately as one of Don's Pokemon, Piplup, tries getting a berry and ends up fighting with one of the local Pokemon over it, and their tussle ends up falling into a group of other Pokemon, which in turn causes a problem as the electric Pokemon begin discharging when they get bumped into, which in turn irritates more Pokemon and ends up causing tensions between the local Pokemon and the trainer's Pokemon. And while Ash and Dawn see this and initially try running in to break up the fighting, well, all the tension dies down as Alice grabs a leaf and begins using the leaf to play a song that when the Pokemon hear it begins cooling their rage and just makes them feel serene to the point where once everything calms down, they seem to talk it out and everybody's hunky-dory again. So yeah, no need for the trainers to get involved at all. And as such, Ash and Co. do thank Alice for what she did, and Alice says it's no problem and that the song that she played was something that her grandmother taught her, and yeah, it just soothes Pokemon. However, this happy moment is kind of brought to an end as a Gallade runs up and tries to get Alice's attention to follow it to another part of the garden. As such, after Ash and Co. put their Pokemon back in their Pokeballs, they go and find the disturbance, and they find what looks like these various spires hit in the middle of the garden that have been twisted up and had been collapsed, which is very surprising because they are made of solid rock, and it looks like these things have genuinely just been twisted on their head. So something is clearly wrong. Although someone comes in and claims that he knows who the culprit of this event is, as we meet Baron Alberto, local dickhead. You can pretty much call him the Gaston of this movie. Only he's not the big bad. Although he has Gaston-like qualities because he's supposed to be handsome, high in the community, always thinks he's right, he's pompous, dresses in the finest clothes, and even has a thing for Alice to the point where he says that she's going to be his wife one day, and Alice pretty much tells him to pound sand because she's not interested. But the thing is, like I said, he does claim to know the one responsible for causing these spires to be twisted on their head, as he claims it's a Pokemon by the name of Darkrai. Now, we learn this a little later, but Darkrai is apparently a local fixture in Alamos, as it basically likes to hang around the garden and doesn't really socialize with people or Pokemon. And that's because, well, Darkrai's powers cause it to give people nightmares, and as a result, people tend to try and shy away from it, and as such, Darkrai himself doesn't socialize with most people or Pokemon and tends to keep to himself, and, well, Darkrai himself already kind of looks pretty damn creepy, if the glare won't shine off of this. Like, this is Darkrai, and yeah, the name Darkrai is appropriate, because that does not look like a friendly face. Look at that. Don't you see that guy? Don't you see this guy reading children's stories to kids? So, I don't really know. I don't really know. Regardless, Baron Alberto thinks that he's the one responsible for all this, and sure enough, as he continues as he does this, someone else arrives on the scene, which at first Baron Alberto thinks is Darkrai, even calling out one of his Pokemon, a Licky, which he orders to shoot a Hyper Beam at who they think is the culprit, only to find that it's instead a guy just kind of hiding in the bushes. The same guy that we saw earlier in the lab, and we learn that his name is Tonio, not Antonio, just Tonio. And it turns out he and Alice are childhood friends, to the point where Alice claims that Tonio is the guy that she likes, not Alberto, though Tonio doesn't fully reciprocate her feelings. And it's not a matter of he's clueless as hell and only sees her as a friend. No, it's just more of a matter of he doesn't know if Alice's feelings are genuine or if she's only saying that to get Baron Alberto off her back. Although, based on Alice's reactions, the feelings are genuine, and she doesn't like the fact that Tonio doesn't fully reciprocate nor understand these emotions. Regardless, Tonio is actually here because of what happened to the stone spires. Because the thing is, that space-time quake that happened earlier in the movie, apparently it's now centered on this area, and apparently whatever happened to these spires was a side effect of that quake. However, before he can actually zero in on the true culprit for this, another reality quake occurs that seems to spread out across the garden, and then seems to zero in on this dark portion on this dark portion in the wooded section. And sure enough, that's when Darkrai makes his appearance, as the reverberations do seem to zero in on him, which does make it look like that Darkrai is the one responsible. As such, Baron Alberto immediately orders his Licky Licky to attack Darkrai, which forces the dark Pokemon to go on the offensive as he tells everyone to get out. And yes, he talks. Something I've really neglected to mention is that if I'm mentioning a Pokemon can talk, it's usually telepathy. So unless I state otherwise, if they talk, it's telepathy. Either way, Darkrai goes on the offensive and tries fighting Licky Licky, but when he tries attacking Licky Licky, he tries shooting what looks like this dark orb at the Pokemon, which Licky Licky dodges. But in the process, the orb ends up engulfing Ash, which of course everyone freaks out about. But then we see things from Ash's point of view, and from his point of view, it didn't look like anything happened to him, but more like something happened to everything else. As the sky is now completely dark, everyone else has vanished, and the garden itself looks rather drab and lifeless. And as Ash looks around, wondering where the hell everyone is, his shadow actually grows and expands to the point where it almost consumes him, and eventually coalesces into the form of Darkrai. However, before the dark Pokemon manifested in this world, Ash saw something. As within the shadows, he saw this strange figure, a Pokemon it seems, but one that looked rather imposing, threatening, something that did not look friendly by any means. And it seemed to zero in on Ash. Regardless, once the shadow wound up coalescing into Darkrai, Ash tries going on the offensive, but he finds that in this world he can't call out his Pokemon. Though he isn't Pokemon-less, as Darkrai vanishes and Ash sees Pikachu, but the both of them basically get caught up in a whirlpool, I guess, in the middle of the stone path. And as such, Ash is able to get Pikachu, but before they can both be swallowed up by the whirlpool and drowned in darkness, Pikachu ends up doing a Thunder Shock, and, the pair of them end up waking up in a hospital bed, or a Pokemon Center bed. Yeah, what turns out that what happened was that Ash was not sent to another world or anything. He was put into one of Darkrai's nightmares. Basically, that whatever that dark ball that Darkrai made was, or as he calls it, the Dark Void. Basically, it has this special ability that anyone that gets hit by this attack basically ends up falling asleep and experiencing some pretty dark nightmares. And as such, since Ash was caught in it, he basically passed out right there in the field, and so Ash's friends brought bring him to the Pokemon Center in order to help keep him safe until he could eventually wake up. As the effect is not permanent, as like once someone's caught in it, they're probably out for a little while, but eventually they will wake up. It's not like you're doomed to an eternal slumber of endless nightmares. No, it's just you get a restless sleep and then you're fit as a fiddle. So what can you do? As such, Ash is thankful to be awake again, though he does think that maybe he wants to go after Darkrai now to prove a point, though Alice urges Ash against it because, the only reason Darkrai attacked the group was because Alberto wound up provoking it. So maybe it's best that Ash just leave Sleeping Dogs lie for now. Something that Ash isn't fully okay with, but does comply with. Still, as this conversation goes on, Tonio begins kind of pondering about what he saw in the garden, and decides that he needs to go off to do some more studying. And as such, he leaves the Pokemon Center and goes to his lab. And the thing is, in his lab, there is a diary from one of the lead designers of Alamos, specifically a diary belonging to a man named Gobi. I think that's his name. It's either Gobi, Kobe, or Cody. I think it's Kobe. But if it's pronounced differently, please let me know. I heard it several different ways in the movie, and I could have been mishearing it every time. Regardless, this diary is supposed to contain information about some strange prophecy that Kobe dreamed up at one point. Something about a nightmare, about two forces that were never meant to meet coalescing inside an Alamos, and how Kobe left behind something to be able to fit in order to deal with them. Something called Oracion. Though what Oracion is, even Tonio has no idea. However, within the pages of the diary actually is a tale about Darkrai, and it turns out that Darkrai has been a local fixture in the town for far longer than anyone realizes, as Darkrai was around when Alice's grandmother was a child. And it turns out that the reason why Darkrai stays in Alamos is because of Alice's grandmother. You see, one day while Alice's grandma, Alicia, was going through town, was going through town with Gobi, I think, or was going through the garden with Gobi, she wound up coming across several Pokemon who were passed out and clearly having nightmares. And when she found the source of it, she found the one giving them nightmares was Darkrai, who was going on the offensive. But the thing is, Darkrai wasn't just randomly attacking for shits and giggles. He was attacking because these Pokemon had clearly attacked him. As when Alicia finds Darkrai, he's clearly weak and not doing well, and he can barely stand up. So he's just not in a good place. As such, Alicia ends up showing concern for Darkrai and ends up befriending him, even offering Darkrai the chance to stay in the garden for as long as he wants, which Darkrai is a little surprised by, but he accepts the offer, especially when Alicia says that the garden is for everybody, so of course Darkrai is always going to be welcome. And ever since then, Darkrai has stayed in the garden and basically been kind of its unofficial guardian angel, so to speak. And as such, Alicia's grandma, we even see a scene of Alicia's grandmother playing the song we even see the scene of Alicia. Sorry, I'm getting the names. We see a scene of Alicia in the past as we see her playing the song that she taught to Alice later on. And while there is a group of Pokemon sitting around listening to it, which in this case seem to be the Pokemon that Darkrai attacked, we see thanks to an outline of shadow that Darkrai's listening in as well. So it's some nice stuff. And as such, that does give Tonio some more answers about Darkrai, but it doesn't really give him any answers about the reality quakes. And unfortunately, while he does attempt to try and fall asleep to try and get those answers, well, apparently the answers don't come to him as easily as Kobe. I'm assuming that the reason Kobe had these visions in his dreams was because of Darkrai's proximity. However, since Tonio is not having any Darkrai affected dreams, he's not really getting any visions of any future premonitions otherwise. In the meantime, after Ash recovers, basically a day goes by, and the next day Ash and Co follow Alice to where the Pokemon contest is supposed to be. As it turns out, the contest is being held in this stadium area connected to this local fixture in Alamos called the Towers of Time and Space. Basically, a pair of twin towers that each tower is supposed to represent time or space, with the tower that's marked with blue representing time, and the tower that's marked with pink representing space. Like I said, the base of the tower has a stadium, but if you travel further into the tower, you can find some interesting fixtures. Like at the base of the tower, you can find a mural that actually depicts Alicia as a young girl, as she's in the middle as she's sitting on a tree and most likely serenading a group of Pokemon. And likewise, beneath the tower is actually Tonio's lab, where Alice and Co do go to visit him and find him passed out in the middle of his work, which at first Alice is concerned for Tonio until he reveals that he fell asleep on purpose, and Alice gets annoyed at him for freaking her out. However, going down to Tonio's lab, the group ends up finding these big golden music discs, which are supposed to connect to the tower. And basically, at the top of the tower, there's an area that you can slip these music discs into, and the towers themselves will just play the music via gongs and bells. As such, Dawn wants to try one out, and so after we get a gag where Dawn gets tired of climbing stairs, and Ash decides to race her up the stairs, resulting in everyone taking a hot air balloon while Ash has to run on foot the rest of the way. Eventually, they all reach the top of the tower, and they do try out the music, and it does actually work. So it's pretty nice stuff. And as such, after they take the balloon back down to the ground, Ash and Co are about to continue seeing the town before they're once again challenged by the trio of trainers with the fully evolved starter Pokemon. And so Ash and Dawn are more than ready to challenge them again. So immediately, Pokemon battle ensues. But the thing is, as this is going on, something has been happening. You see, there is a reason why the reality quakes are occurring, and we actually see the reason as early as the first scene in the movie, because it turns out, outside of time and space, a pair of gods are duking it out. Well, okay, gods in a figurative sense. In this case, the two forces that are causing reality to start hiccuping are the Pokemon of time and space, Dialga and Palkia. Basically, as you can probably guess from that description, each of these Pokemon is meant to be the embodiment of one of these two essential forces in the universe, with Dialga embodying time and Palkia embodying space. And for whatever reason, these two assholes are fighting each other. And their fight is not a small-scale fight. Every attack they launch at each other is actually causing reality to shake, which makes sense. Their domains are literally the domains of time and space. You start fucking with those two essential forces of the universe, and there's gonna be some dire consequences. And unfortunately, though, because the battle is so heated, eventually one of them does manage to get an edge, as Dialga actually manages to shoot at Palkia and ends up hurting him. As Dialga and Palkia have these jewels on their bodies that are a part of them. Dialga has it like right here on his chest; it's a blue jewel, while Palkia has one on has two of these jewels, each on one of his shoulder blades. And unfortunately, one of these jewels gets cracked, and thus, while Palkia still tries staying on the defense as he keeps trying to shoot whatever attacks he can at Dialga, at this point he realizes he needs to make a retreat. And so as he's trying to escape from Dialga, Palkia sees what looks like a vision of Alamos, and then just flees right to it. And back at Alamos, well, apparently whatever Palkia did ends up causing a massive burst of energy that completely covers the entire town, forcing everyone to look up. And at this point, Tonio ends up getting strange readings on his computer. And of course, as things continue going on, eventually the lights die down, and everyone's wondering what the hell's going on. But as this happens, Darkrai appears on the scene and yells at them and seems to yell at everyone to get out. And it's at this point that Baron Alberto arrives on the scene and immediately starts trying to attack Darkrai. And so Darkrai, of course, tries defending himself and ends up using his Void attack and ends up sending out several Dark Orbs that end up hitting several Pokemon and causing them all to pass out. And of course, more of the trainers continue getting involved and try attacking Darkrai, which results in more Pokemon passing out before Darkrai tries to make a retreat. In this case, Ash ends up trying to follow Darkrai, and he ends up chasing Darkrai into an alley, but Darkrai manages to evade Ash, especially when Baron Alberto arrives on the scene with his Licky Licky. However, Darkrai does manage to get one last, no pun intended, lick in, as he manages to shoot another Void Ball right at Licky Licky and causes it to pass out, and thus this allows Darkrai to just make a run for it. However, we see that things are a little strange now. For you see, when Ash ran into this alley looking for Darkrai, he saw what looked like a Pokemon floating through the walls, seemingly a little scared. And then likewise, after Darkrai makes his retreat, we see the same Pokemon fly through. And if you ask me to say what the Pokemon was, I do not remember. I heard it pronounce its name maybe a couple times, and that was it. Again, I don't know every single Pokemon. Cut me some slack here. However, we see a similar phenomenon happen with Licky Licky. As while it's on the ground passed out, it seems to be troubled and seems to be having nightmares before it starts glowing. And then suddenly Baron Alberto begins glowing, and his form changes to now looking exactly like Licky Licky, with the biggest difference being that Baron Alberto had a sash on him to identify him as a Baron, and, well, that sash is the only thing of his that remained when he changed shape. And the thing is, Ash immediately noticed this alongside a camera crew that's been following Baron Alberto around. Yeah, I'm just going to say this right now. It's Team Rocket. They followed Ash and Co. into Alamos. They saw Darkrai earlier, wanted to try and get it, and so they've been masquerading as a TV crew following Baron Alberto around so they can get more information on Darkrai and eventually capture it. So, but either way, Ash and Team Rocket see Alberto change, and Jessie ends up showing Alberto his reflection in her compact, which caused Alberto to pretty much go, what the hell? With Ash even thinking that he's still in dreamland, and even asking Pikachu to wake him up, and one Thundershock later, he realizes he's not dreaming. However, as this happens, a cloud front seems to move in on Alamos, and things seem to get even stranger, as all the trainers bring their Pokemon to the Pokemon Center. And we see that one Pokemon that was floating around is not the only one, as every single Pokemon that is passed out and dreaming is basically projecting themselves, so to speak, into the real world. And it's clear that, and as this is going on, Alberto and Team Rocket arrive and confirm that something even stranger is going on with Alberto's transformation. As such, Tonio is able to figure out through through his technology, that something is happening to reality and causing the dream worlds and causing the dream reality and reality to begin overlapping. And each of the visions of the Pokemon that are seen to be floating around are actually the dreams that those Pokemon are having, as for whatever as each of them are dreaming that they're being chased by something terrifying. And in the case of Baron Alberto, the reason why he's changed into Licky Licky is because Licky Licky's nightmare is that it became Alberto. You gotta suck really hard when even your Pokemon think you're a jackass. Regardless, it's clear that something strange is going on, and it gets even stranger as the trio of trainers from earlier come back in and let everyone know that something's happened to the barrier around the town. And when everyone goes outside, we see the cloud front has turned into a full-on fog bank that's completely enshrouded the town. And for whatever reason, this fog can't be dispersed, as they try to disperse it using their Pokemon, and it doesn't even get affected. And if anyone tries to leave via the conventional means, like through one of the bridges, they instead end up coming right back the way they came. So yeah, something very trippy is going on. And of course, since Baron Alberto is a complete and utter dumbass, he thinks that this is all Darkrai's fault, that all this strange stuff didn't happen until he arrived on the scene, and so he basically just stirs all the trainers of Alamos into an angry mob so that they can hunt Darkrai down and take him out so they can put everything back together. And mob mentality basically takes over as everybody sides with the Baron, and they end up trying to hunt Darkrai down. And while Ash and Co at first are ready to join the Baron in fighting Darkrai, well, Alice and Tonio managed to talk the trio of trainers down. Because the thing is, well, both Alice and Tonio do not think that Darkrai is bad. In fact, Tonio even has eyewitness evidence that Darkrai probably is a good guy. Because you see, when Tonio and Alice were kids, Darkrai saved Alice's life. As basically, one day Tonio and Alice had been playing in the garden, and Tonio and Alice had been walking on the ledge of this hill. And while Tonio told her not to play up there because it was dangerous, young Alice thought, "Oh, I'm fine, it's all good." Until her footing gave out and she nearly fell a great height. Thankfully, Darkrai was able to save her and bring her somewhere safe. But when Tonio went to go see if Alice is okay, Darkrai had already fled the scene, and Alice was passed out on a patch of grass. And when Alice woke up, she found Tonio above her, and so she naturally assumed that he saved her. Sorry, that was a bag. But either way, Tonio basically confirms that he doesn't think that Darkrai is a bad guy. But that still raises the question of, then what's causing this? Why is the town suddenly cut off like this? And as such, Tonio ends up going back to his lab to try and find those answers. And, well, answers he does find, as he ends up Thing is, Tonio has his own Pokemon as well. In this case, it's a group of Drifloon and a Drifblimp. I think that's how it's pronounced. Drifblimp, I think, yeah. That float around town and basically have their own little camera systems to keep an eye on things. Which is why Tonio is able to get scanners all around the town. And the thing is, these scanners were going off when that light that flashed across the town earlier happened. And so Tonio is able to use his equipment and is able to figure out that all these time-space disturbances seem to be rooted back to that. And not just the town being cut off, but everything prior, like the spires as well, as all of these things had been occurring before Darkrai made his appearance in the middle of town. And likewise, when Darkrai made his appearance earlier in the movie, it was only after the things happened to the spire, with the only one accusing Darkrai being Baron Alberto himself. And as such, as Tonio zeroes in, he's able to figure out he's able to find the real cause for the time-space disturbances, as he sees that the epicenter of that light that they saw earlier is Palkia. As such, Tonio brings his findings back to the Pokemon Center and shows it to Ash and Co., and they're able to figure out that Palkia is the thing that Darkrai was reacting to. When he said get out, but when he was basically telling everyone to get out earlier, he wasn't talking to any of the trainers, he was talking to Palkia. And the thing is, when Ash sees Palkia in Tonio's computer and scans of the initial light event, he's able to recognize Palkia from his dreams. As it turns out, that Darkrai was fully aware that Dialga and Palkia were involved in all this, and he was actively trying to warn Ash, hey, watch out for these guys, they're the cause of all the problems. So yeah, the group is able to determine that Darkrai is actually a good guy right now, although unfortunately Baron Alberto and the rest of the Pokemon trainers don't really get this knowledge right away, as they do manage to find Darkrai and just begin bringing down the heat on him. Though thankfully Darkrai is able to take care of most of them with his Void attack, and while Baron Alberto does try to take advantage of the fact that he's a licky to try and fight Darkrai, which I do think is actually a smart strategy, I won't lie, eventually even he gets his ass trounced as he and Team Rocket get thrown into a tree. And as such, Darkrai pretty much says, fuck this noise, I got better things to do, as he goes across the town, and he does manage to locate where Palkia is, because it turns out, when Palkia entered Alamos, well, he didn't go anywhere else, as the initial point of his appearance in the town was right in between the time-space towers, and so that's where he's been this whole time, completely invisible. And so Darkrai knows that Palkia is there, and since he knows Palkia is the reason why the town is as loopy as it is, he immediately starts trying to attack Palkia right there. And while at first his attacks don't do anything, well, eventually he manages to disturb Palkia enough that it wakes it up from its initial attack, and it basically drops the invisibility, and subsequently drops the fog burst that it had surrounding the town. And we soon see the fog burst was not the thing keeping everyone trapped. It turns out that when Palkia arrived in Alamos, it wasn't Palkia entering our dimension that caused things to get weird with Pokemon. It was the fact that he pulled Alamos into another dimension, his own little pocket dimension. Basically, going back to the injury that Palkia sustained when fighting Dialga, Palkia realized that he needed a place to recuperate that Dialga wouldn't be able to follow. And for the most part, when Palkia fled to Alamos, Dialga had no idea where the hell he went, and so the fighting had stopped. But the thing is, rather than Palkia just deciding to hide in the town and do his own thing, he basically just pulled the entire town into his own little pocket dimension, and that's where he's been staying this whole time, basically out of Dialga's way, and just minding his own business. And unfortunately, now that he's woken up, the disguise is just fallen away, as now everyone inside Alamos is now seeing the true reality of things, as they see the town is literally inside a giant void. Like, it's not like just the entire town is, and like everything, and the structures it's built on, the rock it's built on, it's all just in this other dimension. Don't know why he had to pull it into the other dimension, but I don't know, I don't care. Point is, it's in another dimension, and Darkrai knows that Palkia is responsible, so Darkrai goes on the offensive and starts attacking Palkia. Now, at first, Palkia and Darkrai do end up trading blows, so to speak, as Darkrai keeps trying to get Palkia to get to GTFO, but unfortunately, this battle gets interrupted because, guess what? With the smoke screen now gone, Dialga now knows where Palkia is, and immediately arrives on the scene and attacks both Palkia and Darkrai. Though it's clear that Palkia is the intended target, Darkrai has more collateral damage. Regardless, though, the two Pokemon of time and space are now aware of each other again and start duking it out right there in the middle of the town. And unfortunately, they do not give a shit about collateral damage. They don't give a shit that they're in the middle of a town. They don't give a shit that there are people here. Basically, they're just deciding, screw you, and they're just gonna keep attacking each other. And of course, their attacks are causing a whole mess of damage as buildings and structures all get torn down or taken apart or just end up getting holes in them. But the thing is, you gotta still remember, these are Pokemon that represent the forces of time and space. And then fighting in a separate dimension from Alamos was causing reality quakes that were affecting our world, despite them not existing on the same plane of existence. Well, the thing is, now that the town and these two Pokemon are on the same plane of existence, the reality quakes are now having a much different effect on Alamos Town. Namely, the town is starting to vanish. Like, from the very fringes of the town, it's dissolving away and just slowly moving inward. And the more Dialga and Palkia fight, the worse it gets. And as such, everyone in the town begins realizing They need to stop this now. And while there is a small comfort in the fact that all the Pokemon Darkrai put to sleep are now waking up again, well, all that really does is just cause the overlapping dreams to fade away. So all the Pokemon all the ghost Pokemon will disappear as their physical bodies wake up, and likewise, Baron Alberto wakes up again, reverts back to normal now that his Licky is awake. But again, town's kind of going down the crap hole right now. They need to find a way to fix this right the hell now. And unfortunately, and the thing is, while Darkrai does his best to try and stop Dialga and Palkia from fighting, Dialga and Palkia are pretty much gods in comparison to Darkrai. And yes, all three of them are technically considered legendary Pokemon. But it's like if you had Bigfoot fighting against the Loch Ness Monster. They're both considered cryptids, and both are considered strange and unusual. But one's a giant lizard, and one's just a very hairy ape thing. At some point, you're gonna have to realize that. At some point, you're gonna know that one of them's outclassed. And if any of you say Bigfoot is the one that would be outclassing Loch Ness Monster, you know what I'm talking about. Regardless, while Darkrai can do what he can to slow the battle down, he's not stopping it. And if anything, all he's really doing is just causing the battle to go from a two-way fight to a three-way fight, as Dialga and Palkia are not just shooting at each other, but also Darkrai, because they don't want Darkrai interfering with their fight. As such, Ash and Co end up reconvening outside, and they realize they need to find a way to stop this. As Tonio begins putting two and two together and realizing that it was Dialga and Palkia's fighting that caused all this, and that the reason Palkia came into our dimension was because he had sustained injury. But again, the only way they can fix this is to get Dialga and Palkia to stop fighting, and they don't know what to do. But the thing is, that's when Tonio begins remembering Gobi's journal, as he remembers the line about Oracion and how he left that in place in order to stop his vision of the future from occurring. However, he has no idea what the hell Oracion is, and as he verbalizes this to the group, Alice actually says that she does know what it is. As you see, in the journal was a picture of Alice's grandmother when she was a kid alongside Gobi, and along the backside of the photo was actually a music sheet, specifically the music sheet for the song that Alicia taught Alice. And it turns out that song is Oracion. And basically, Gobi set this thing up intentionally because this song has the power to soothe Pokemon's rage. So if they can play that song on a grander scale, they can probably calm Dialga and Palkia down. And wouldn't you know it, those twin towers that were located in the center of Alamos, they were created by Gobi too. And basically, the group figures out that Gobi must have hidden an Oracion somewhere below with all the other music discs, and so if they can find it and put it in the tower, then the tower will play the song and basically stop the fighting. However, unfortunately, Tonio has no idea where Oracion is. None of the music discs are labeled Oracion, so they can't find it, or at least they have a harder time finding it. Thankfully, Alice is able to figure out where it is, as the music sheet does contain enough visual hints that she's able to zero in on where it is. As part of the mural had various other music discs separate around, and she's able to find one disc that has the same design as the music sheet and figures out that that's Oracion. But the problem is, though, they still got to get this thing up to the top of the tower before Dialga and Palkia destroy everything. And while at first the group tries taking Alice's balloon up, unfortunately the ensuing battle between the three legendaries ends up damaging the balloon so much that Ash and Dawn, who are riding the balloon, end up having to jump off and climb the tower by themselves with their Pokemon. Though thankfully Ash has the music disc, so not all is lost. In the meantime, Alice and Tonio basically have to land the balloon somewhere else, or risk getting hurt themselves. In the meantime, Brock is actually coordinating with Nurse Joy to try and evacuate the town's populace into the garden, because with everything going to hell, they need to get them to a safe place. Though even this safe place is not going to be safe forever, so they're just doing whatever they can to try and slow down the dissolving as much as possible. And apparently, Pokemon attacks can slow it down somewhat. So whatever. Regardless, Darkrai continues doing his best to try and stop the fighting while defending people where he can. And at one point, he does get knocked out of the fray and lands in the garden where he meets with Alice. And while at first he does mistake Alice for Alicia, well, Alice does correct him, and basically within Alice, Darkrai does see a vision of Alicia, and this does encourage him to keep fighting. And unfortunately, though, the dissolving effect has actually dissolved so much of the town that now the only thing left is a handful of buildings and the towers themselves. So, and unfortunately, as Dialga and Palkia are getting ready for one final attack, Tonio notes that if those attacks connect, then it will completely destabilize the dimension of the town, and they will all be pretty much fucked. As such, Dialga and Palkia are getting ready to launch the attack, but Darkrai comes in yelling and proclaiming that this garden is for everybody, as he manages to throw up enough of a void ball to consume the attacks and entrap Dialga and Palkia to keep them from fighting. Although, unfortunately, this is a temporary reprieve, so as such, basically it's now just a ticking clock, as Ash and Dawn need to reach the top of the tower as quickly as possible, otherwise Dialga and Palkia will break free and they will still launch their final attacks. Thankfully, they are able to reach the top, but unfortunately, they can't get the music disc in position because it turns out the slot that you normally put the music disc is the wrong slot for the one they have. And so, while they do eventually find it, in the time it takes them to figure this out, Darkrai's orb ends up fading away, and Dialga and Palkia break free, and both realize that if they want to get back to killing each other, then Darkrai needs to be moved out of the way, and so they end up unleashing their own attacks directly on him, which at first doesn't seem to kill him, until he flies away and we see him dissolving alongside the town. Yeah, that's lovely. Regardless, that means that the last line of defense has now fallen, which means Dialga and Palkia now have free reign to just wail on each other. Thankfully, Ash and Dawn do manage to get the Oracion music disc into the proper slot, and while at first the machine doesn't turn on because so much of the tower has been dissolved that the power source is now going nuts, thankfully Dawn and Ash do have their electric Pokemon, Ash Pikachu, and in the case of Dawn, it's the Pika clone for Generation 4, Pachirisu, which is an adorable squirrel Pokemon. I want it, seriously. Minun, Plusle, Pachirisu, I want them all! Give them to me, damn it! But either way, they managed to use their electrical attacks to charge up the tower, and so they are able to finally play the Oracion music before Dialga and Palkia can launch their final attacks at each other. And apparently the Oracion music is more powerful than anyone realized, because it begins reverberating all across the tower as we see all these slots opening up, and the tower itself actually glowing in a rather soothing green light. And basically from the sides of the tower arise these structures that pretty much look like wings, and the energy that the tower is creating actually accumulates and grows to the point where it actually begins encompassing the entire void. And it's actually some really nice music. I'll give you credit. I recommend looking up the Oracion music yourself, but it's some really nice music, and it does really feel glorious and gorgeous and angelic in its own regard, so I dig it. It's really nice. But, well, the large-scale music does its job as Dialga and Palkia hear it, and they begin realizing, hey, why are we fighting? As such, on top of that, the music even heals Palkia's injury, so that's nice, which I probably mentioned before. If I did, I apologize. I do repeat myself sometimes. I do repeat myself like that. But either way, Dialga decides that if the fighting's done, he's just gonna go and do his own thing as he vacates this dimension. Before Palkia can do the same, Ash and Dawn end up urging Palkia to pretty much undo all the damage he's caused, since it's because of him that the town is dissolving and has been taken out of its proper place. So Ash and Dawn pretty much tell Palkia, "You broke this. Now fix it," which Palkia concedes to, as he uses his energy to send what's left of Alamos Town back to its proper place in the proper dimension. And sure enough, once it returns, basically everything returns. Everything that was dissolved is now back in place. Everything is put back exactly where it was. In fact, if you didn't know any better, it would look like the town itself was never displaced in the first place. So everything is now back to normal. And Palkia basically just disappears to go do his own thing. As such, from there, everything just seems to be wrapped up, as the town is now safe and sound, though Ash and co do lament that they lost Darkrai in the process. And as such, while they all go to the garden to mourn and remember Darkrai, as they leave, They all look towards the shadow of a nearby rock structure, and they find that standing on that structure is Darkrai. And when they go to the source of the shadow, sure enough, yeah, Darkrai is back as well. As it turns out, when everything was restored, so was he. So hey, at least hey, happy ending all around. And from there, that's just where the film ends. Because after this, we really all that's left is stuff that we see in the credits. As we see that the Pokemon contest still goes off. Dawn participates. She doesn't win, but it's clear that she at least got maybe second or third place. So hey, she made progress. And likewise, we see that Team Rocket are finally caught by Baron Alberto as they ditched the news reporter costumes and tried breaking into his own personal study, which they don't get very far in when Licky Licky and Baron Alberto catch them. And from there, Ash and Co. leave Alamos Town, bidding farewell to Tonio and Alice. So Overall, just a fond farewell, so. Yeah, so that was The Rise of Darkrai. What are my thoughts on it? I think the film is good. But it's not great. Now, the thing is, I do want to emphasize that like I said, okay. To kind of get my thoughts all organized here, I do like this movie. I do genuinely think that it's worth watching if you're interested. But with that said, there is plenty that hold it back a little. Now again, the thing is, the story itself is a very by-the-numbers story, I'm sad to say. Don't misunderstand. Now, don't take that to mean that I think that the story is bad by any means. No, far from it. In fact, I will give credit where it's due. While I do think this story is a very by-the-numbers story, it does those numbers, it manages to check those numbers rather well. As basically, how I would call it a by-the-numbers story is that it feels very bare bones in that regard. It has everything you would expect from a Pokemon movie. We got the new side characters that are just there for this movie that are clearly meant to be the movie main characters who follow the anime main characters around and help them out, which in this case are Alice, Tonio, and Darkrai. We have the rising action and mystery and tension as things go awry. We have a looming threat on the horizon that the heroes need to take care of. We have a great grand battle with grand stakes that does keep you on the edge of your seat. And by the end, we have our standard Pokemon happy ending. Though I guess you could say standard in air quotes there, because at least a few Pokemon films have had bittersweet endings at least. So what can you do? But in that regard, The Rise of Darkrai is pretty bare bone. In that regard, Rise of Darkrai does hit all the notes, but the problem is that while it hits these notes in a satisfactory fashion, unfortunately, they doesn't really go too deep with them, and that's, I think, the film's biggest problem. Like, to kind of go down the list one by one, first let's talk about Darkrai. Now, I like Darkrai. I think Darkrai is a really damn cool-looking Pokemon. It looks menacing and creepy and strange and ethereal, and definitely looks like a Pokemon you don't want to fuck with. And even though we eventually learn that Darkrai is a good guy and is actively trying to protect Alamos Town and the garden that it calls home, at the same time, you really do get the impression that Darkrai does not like socializing with people, as any scene that it appears in, we don't really get a sense of we don't really get any friendly vibes off of it, as it seems very threatening, very antagonistic, and just keeps its distance from everybody. Now, with that said, you do get a sense that Darkrai does hold a noble spirit, as it clearly does care enough for people to want to protect them, and while it does end up fighting back against everybody, it clearly does not want to fight everyone, as the only reason it attacks is because it's just defending itself. It's yeah, which if you try and argue, well, why would it defend itself like that? It gives them nightmares. Well, the thing is, it's fucking Darkrai. That's what he does. And quite frankly, putting someone into a dream is a much better alternative than putting them down, is what I'm saying. At least the dream they'll wake up from. They'll have some bad dreams for a little bit, but they'll be able to wake it up and hopefully walk it off if their nightmares weren't too traumatic, which I'm hoping they weren't. So what can you do there? But either way, we do see that Darkrai has a noble soul, and I'll even give credit where it's due. The final battle with Dialga and Palkia, I think, was a really good one. And when Darkrai was essentially vaporized, so to speak, it did feel like a heavy moment, and the ending did feel a little tragic, knowing that Darkrai, despite how he was ostracized by people, was still actively trying to defend the town, even though up to that point everyone had been thinking he was the problem. No, the problem I think with Darkrai is while it does have the basics for a character arc there, including the misunderstood hero who's at first labeled the villain. Unfortunately, there's no connection to Darkrai. Now, you could argue actions speak louder than words when it comes to Darkrai. Sorry, that was my echo, and you probably heard a bizz on my phone, so whatever. But like I said, you could argue that actions speak louder than words for Darkrai, and in some regards, they do, because the way Darkrai continuously puts himself in harm's way for the sake of protecting the town and everyone in it do showcase that there is a noble soul in there who wants to do the right thing for the right reasons. But the thing is, if you wanted me to talk about Darkrai's character, I wouldn't be able to give you anything specific, because we don't really have any personal connection to Darkrai in this movie. I don't feel any okay, I'm not going to say to the point where I'm not going to say that I don't feel any connection to Darkrai, because I do. I think I do like him, and again, I did feel something when he disappeared, but we don't really get a sense of Darkrai's character or who he is as a person. And before you say, well, of course we can't do that, he's a Pokemon. Well, to that I respond with, there have been plenty of movies before this where we got a sense of a Pokemon's character even when they couldn't talk. In Mewtwo Strikes Back, we got a sense that Mew was a flighty but very powerful Pokemon before we even got to know them. We saw that Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres all were basically wild animals who wanted to take control wherever they were just because they could. We got with Celebi, we got the sense that Celebi was a kind soul who wanted to help out wherever he could, but was also clearly a wild animal that sometimes that sometimes was nervous of new people. And even Latios and Latias were able to had more defined character in their film, because the thing is, you got a sense of what they were like, what they liked and do, what they like to do personally, their personal connections, the stakes they're willing to go to for each other or their friends, and thus it made Latios' sacrifice in that movie that mean much more, because you got the chance to get to know both him and Latias. And even last week at Pokemon Ranger in the Temple of the Sea, despite Manaphy basically being a baby, I felt more connection to Manaphy in that movie, because this was an adorable little creature who had this big, tremendous role to fulfill. And by the end of the film, when Manaphy had to go off and fulfill this role, it gave us a heart. It had to basically say goodbye to the person it considered its mother, and yet at the same time, it knew that it was going with love because its mom, because it knew that its mother loved her, or knew that its mother loved it, and May was finding joy in the fact that Manaphy was being able to fulfill its destiny. There was still something kind of a connection there. For Darkrai, while I do like him and do basically cheer for him when he's protecting people and even feel sad when bad things happen to him, I couldn't tell you anything about him. At most, he comes across as basically a jerk with a heart of gold, and that's all I can really say about him. We don't know what his personality is like when he's on his own. We don't see him interact with many people because he doesn't want to socialize with other people, since, there's the stigma with him giving everybody nightmares, and so as a result, we don't really get a chance to connect with him. And the thing is, you could have had a character arc for him, because the thing is, Darkrai does talk. Like I said, he uses telepathy, but unlike other Pokemon in past movies who have had telepathy, he doesn't appear very often in the movie. Actually, scratch that. He does appear very often, but the amount of times he actually socializes with people is slim to bubkiss, as the most he usually says to anyone in a given situation are usually short sentences like, "Get out," hello, or "This garden belongs to everyone." Those are the extent of what he says. We don't really have moments where we see him being gentle and kind and seeing more of a brighter soul than his dark exterior would showcase. And as a result, it doesn't feel like we have a true connection and thus an emotional bond with Darkrai. There's enough there that we can like him, and definitely enough that you do feel something when bad things happen to him, but at the same time, it makes the connection just does not feel strong. And as a result, and on top of that, even the reveal that he is a good guy feels a little rushed, as As again, we do have people advocating for him already that say he's actually a good guy. And while there's enough there in the beginning to make it look like he may be a bad guy, again, the reveal that he's actually a good guy feels a little too quick, and it feels like it wasn't built up to enough. As the most build up we had to that point was Tonio and Alice telling their story about Darkrai saving Alice's life. Beyond that, all we had was a few words from Alice saying, "I don't think Darkrai's doing all this strange stuff, guys." And a suspicion is not a... Sorry, food digesting. A suspicion of non-guilt is not the same as being not guilty. So, in that regard, it feels like there wasn't a lot of build-up to the reveal. So, I do consider that a problem. And in that same token, Tonio and Alice, like Darkrai, I do like this pair. They're pretty strong characters, and both are very important for the development of the movie. Both of them have very definable characters, and I can tell them apart from each other. And I do like seeing them working off of the heroes and each other. The little cute banter they sometimes have is sweet. I like that Alice clearly does have feelings for Tonio, but he's just too dense to realize those feelings are genuine, and I do kind of find that kind of adorable in its own little sense. So I do like seeing them, and and they're not useless characters. They do a lot. They do plenty in this movie. Tonio is the one that first detected the disturbances in space and time and was investigating them, and Alice was the one that stood up for Darkrai and was able to figure out where the music disc was because her grandmother taught it to her, because her grandmother left enough hints to where its location could be. Which, by the way, if this entire tower was set up to try and prevent Dialga and Palkia from destroying the town, then why were all the pieces so hard to fit together? You'd think that you'd want to make this jigsaw puzzle a little easier to figure out if the alternative to not figuring out was everyone in the town fucking dying. Just saying, Gobi, maybe, just maybe, you should have made this puzzle a little easier to solve. But whatever. Anyway, back to Alice and Tonio. Basically, I do think they're good characters, and I do like them. But the thing is, they also don't have an arc in the movie. We feel like we have the trappings for an arc to them, but nothing really feels developed for it. We don't have any moments between the two of them where they seem to grow closer or actually start sharing their feelings in earnest. And as a result, there is still a bit of an emotional wall between them and the audience. Like with Darkrai, it's not enough of a wall that we can't glimpse over and see their characters play out. And again, they are not superfluous characters. They do their fair share in the movie, and I can easily say that if you cut either of them from the movie, you would need to do a lot of serious rewrites in order to explain everything. Because again, both of them do provide something essential to the overarching plot in order to get us to the finale. It's just at the same time for the character on the character side of things, they could have been their dynamic and their own personal character arcs should have been built up more. Again, what we have is satisfying. It's enjoyable enough, but unfortunately, I feel like it just needed more. And I think that's a big thing with the movie. The story itself is serviceable. It's perfectly fine. If I was just going to judge the movie on the plot alone, I think the film was just okay. It could have been a hell of a lot better, but for what we have, it is enjoyable. Because while they will claim that the film is very cookie cutter in how it basically goes about the plot, well, that cookie-cutter nature comes on the flip base is a dual-sided thing, as while it can seem tedious and just by the numbers on one side, on the other side, it's clear that effort was still put in to make these characters not feel like just basic cardboard cutouts. You do feel like these are genuine characters who have their own personalities, their own interests, and their own dynamics. And it is nice to see them working off of each other and actively working towards a solution. And on top of that, and as a result, it does still make the story feel satisfying. It does make the story feel satisfying. It's just, it felt like it could have had a lot more to it. Again, what we have is perfectly emotionally fine. I can watch this film. I can watch the story enough and still get invested in it to the point where I can be entertained. It needed more meat to it, and that's I think the biggest problem with the story. What we have is fine. it just needed a bit more time it just needed to be nourished a bit more in order to become a full project. So yes, I will consider it a flaw. Not enough to ruin the film in my opinion, but definitely one that does make the film feel like it's keeping you at arm's length just a little bit. Just a little bit. With that said, part of the reason why I would still go so far, well, the reason why I would still call this film a good movie instead of just an okay movie is, believe it or not, the second and third acts entirely. The first third of the film, it's standard Pokemon stuff. And you could argue the second and third acts are also the same thing, but the first act is mostly just there to help do all the establishing stuff. Ash and Co. arrive in this new town. They meet all these new characters who are only here for the movie. We meet the Pokemon that this movie is mostly centering on. We see them doing their own thing. We establish that something trippy is going on. Yada yada yada. It's everything that you kind of expect from a Pokemon movie. But the second and third acts, while they do follow a similar format, it's how they're executed that really keep me invested and want to see how this film goes. Firstly, the second act. From the moment that Palkia arrives in Alamos, things just start getting weird. And it's a good weird. Like, you begin immediately asking questions and you just feel a sense of unease about everything. As once Palkia arrives, things don't go to shit right away. But when Palkia first arrives, it's on a very sunny day, and at first it stays sunny and stays sunny until Darkrai quote unquote attacks. But after Darkrai makes his escape, that's when it starts getting cloudy. The sun goes away and it turns into a rather dreary day. Add on the fact that now even more strange shit is happening all around the town. We got Pokemon falling asleep and having their dreams be reflected into reality, as we see phantom versions of all the sleeping Pokemon all just flying or running or doing whatever to escape from some unseen threat, while in the case of Licky Licky, he dreams about becoming Baron Alberto, so Baron Alberto becomes him. It all feels strange and surreal, and while you could maybe argue that Darkrai is the one doing this, it still feels so out of left field and doesn't make sense. Add on the fact that when everyone tries to leave Alamos Town through the fog bank, they just end up right back where they started. And it creates a sense of unease and dread that something is going on that you cannot fully understand. And even when... And the thing is, that's a good kind of way of building up the story. Because if you want to really build up fear, give the audience something that they can't understand. And this whole thing does not make any sense, even in the traditional Pokemons, even in a traditional Pokemon movie. As even a Pokemon film does operate by some form of rules. Here, it feels like that we are stepping into an entirely different zone, the Pokemon Twilight Zone, if you were. As we don't really understand why the dream world is overlapping with the real world, or why the town is suddenly cut off from the outside world because of this dense fog bank. It's trippy and it's strange and uncomfortable, but it's all these things in the best way possible, and it keeps you enticed in the story and makes you want to know where the hell things are going and why it's the case. And yeah, like I said, we already know Dialga and Palkia are very much entrenched with what's going on, but we also don't know that Palkia escaped Alamos, and when it is revealed that he is in Alamos, that's when we get to the third act of the movie. And the third act is a big holy shit, because the image of Alamos just floating in this giant dark void, so with no way of getting out and being caught in the middle of these two colossal titans fight, it's a great climax, and it really keeps the tension going and really keeps your heart pounding as every single blow and attack from Dialga and Palkia just makes things worse for the people of Alamos. And it's honestly pretty damn terrifying seeing the town slowly begin dissolving while our heroes are doing everything they can to stop Dialga and Palkia from pretty much destroying everything here. It's actually really damn good, and it keeps the tension going, especially when every little obstacle that could get in the hero's way does get in their way, and you know that every second that they're not racing up to the top of those towers is a second that Dialga and Palkia are wailing on each other, which is another second of reality just slowly crapping itself. So it's really damn impressive and really manages to keep things going. And when things really get down to the wire, when Dialga and Palkia are just one attack each away from completely destroying the reality of the town, while Ash and Dawn are struggling to figure out how to get this freaking music disc in the proper place, you just really want things to go well, and basically you're looking for anything to keep things going. It's part of why I think Darkrai's sacrifice in the film does work as much as it does, because you know that Darkrai's doing everything he can to try and give our heroes the time that they need, but it's a losing battle. Because again, he's a legendary too, but Dialga and Palkia are pretty much literal gods. To compare him to them would be like comparing a small pebble to a giant boulder. There is no contest there. So yes, there is a lot of great tension, and it keeps you fully invested. And when the town is dissolved to the point where the only things left are the garden, the towers, and maybe a few buildings here and there, you really feel like that everyone's screwed, and you just want the heroes to get that final win in, to get the music disc all prepared, to get the music started. Because all Dialga and Palkia had to do is listen to those towers gonging that music, and they'll calm down. And that's it. And as a result, when we do get that finale, it feels very much earned. And when the golden light from the towers just begins flowing all across the void, it feels like a very satisfactory and well-earned moment. So it does still feel like there's grand tension. And as a result, these things combined, I think, do make this film a much better experience than you think it would be. Like I said, the story is not bad, but it's and the story and characters aren't bad, but they're very by the numbers. Which actually, if I'm talking about characters again, let's go back to Baron Alberto. I'm almost tempted to not talk about him, but he is a factor in the movie, and he doesn't really play a large part after that. Like, okay, he's basically just the annoying dumbass that basically acts as a secondary antagonist, because he's the one that initially turns everyone against Darkrai, but at the same time, I feel like he's more a nuisance than anything, because even when he led an angry mob of Pokemon trainers to go after Darkrai really did not have any issue. In fact, at no point in this film did I feel like Darkrai was in danger until he started facing Dialga and Palkia. Basically, the only reason Darkrai attacked these people was because they were attacking him, and he already had more than enough attacks up his sleeve to try and deal with them. So, Baron Alberto was annoying, but I think that was the point. I think that was the whole point. He was just an annoying dumbass. He was the Gaston without the tragic end. So what can you do? But anyway, when it comes down to the plot of the movie, I do find, like I said, it is pretty basic and cookie cutter in how it's set out and how it develops the characters. But with that said, the film does still do enough to try and ingratiate these characters to the audience that I can still like them. While Darkrai's arc, I feel, is a little too basic and should have had more time to it, I did find myself liking Darkrai by the end, and I was happy that he made it out okay by the end when the town and him were restored. While I think Tonio and Alice should have had much more to their relationship than what they had, they still were very important characters with very definable personalities, and I did genuinely like their banter and seeing them work off each other as they were helping Ash and Co. save the day. Of course, the film looks gorgeous as hell. I can pretty much say that for most of all Pokemon movies. And again, what propels this movie from being just an okay movie to a good movie, in my opinion, are how well executed the second and third acts are. The second act really does carry a sense of tension and unease as Palkia's presence begins having an adverse effect on Alamos Town, and likewise the final act, when Alamos Town is literally dissolving away as Dialga and Palkia have their big fight, really does keep you on the edge of your seat and makes you really want to see our heroes get out on top, especially when they face all these little obstacles that keep getting in their way and almost make them fail by the end. So again, I do find that to be good stuff. And as a result, while I do think the film does have its own personal story problems, overall, I do still think it's a good movie. It's not a great movie by any means. I do think the story problems do hold it back in that regard, but I do think that you will enjoy this film if you're a Pokemon fan. It's definitely got enough in there that I think you can have a good time, and overall, I think it is nice. Although there is one thing I do want to talk about this movie namely that it's the first Pokemon movie that we've seen so far that has left things pretty open-ended. Why? Well, going back to Dialga and Palkia, we never learn why these two Pokemon were fighting. Because after all, they clearly have existed for a long time. Dialga and Palkia are legendary Pokemon, and each are meant to embody time and space. So clearly, they've existed for possibly eons. So why did they start fighting now? And the movie does not give an answer to this. And initially when I first saw the movie, I did kind of consider that a flaw, as Pokemon movies usually do like to wrap those stories up in a nice little bow. So you'd think that they would explain why Dialga and Palkia just one day looked at each other and thought, fuck you, and started fighting. And yet they don't. They don't explain why these two legendaries decided to duke it out. And again, while I would have initially called that a flaw, the thing is, it is explained, but not in this movie. The thing is, the Diamond and Pearl films, for the most part, actually do have an ongoing story arc to them. As unlike most of the other Pokemon films, they are interconnected in some way, which, believe it or not, I find to be a little surprising, because thing is, the Pokemon films, they kind of treat continuity as more as a suggestion. The only real canon they seem to follow is that of the anime, but otherwise, they are very much disconnected from the anime. To give an example of that, which I wish I had talked about when I could, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. While Mew is a Pokemon that we have seen in the Pokemon films before, specifically Mewtwo Strikes Back, well, we didn't really get any clear answers about whether the Mew that was featured in that movie was the same Mew or a completely different Mew. Now the thing is, usually with Pokemon there are more than one. But in the case of legendary Pokemon, part of the reason why there's legendary is that there aren't more than one. When it comes to legendary Pokemon, there's usually just one. And yet, no point in Lucario and the Mystery of Mew did Mew seem to ever acknowledge that he recognized Ash or the rest of the group. So whether or not in the canon of Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, Mewtwo Strikes Back ever happened is up for debate. So that's kind of an example of canon discontinuity with the movies. So the fact that the Diamond and Pearl films, or at least 3 of them, do actually have an ongoing story is something rather surprising. And I do think the payoff is well worth it, especially when you see how things play out. Especially since next week's film actually deals with the direct consequences of this film. Because, while Alamos Town is all fine and dandy and no one there has got to worry about all the big heavy shit that went down anymore, well, Dialga and Palkia still caused some significant waves across reality, and those waves were noticed. By whom? Well, I hope you tune in next week as we actually get to meet the Pokemon equivalent of the devil himself with Giratina and the Sky Warrior.